We're talking tonight about one of the most asked things I get here recently because it's almost the start of race season. We're talking about gear ratios and tire sizes. So, yeah, if you're watching this now or later, the only thing I ask of you is to hit the like button. That's it. That's the only thing I ask. So, all right. I'll be honest with you guys and gals. I forgot it was Tuesday. I thought it was Monday. I don't know why, because Monday was yesterday. But I forgot it was Tuesday, so I didn't get a guest. So we're doing this instead because I've gotten a lot of questions lately about this. So we are going to do a quick refresher for those who've been around for a minute. We're going to do a how-to for those who haven't. So Marvin, what's up? I'm going to be honest with you guys and gals. I've been getting a lot of questions lately, and I'm going to tell you something. If you are messaging me personally or the page, can you do me a favor? And this is a huge one. Don't send me a message asking if you can ask me questions. I know it sounds goofy. Just ask your question. Because what happens a lot of times is when I can get to where I can sit down and I can message people and reply to them, it's usually an odd hour. And so if you ask me if you can ask a question, then I have to reply with, sure, what's up? And then you'll reply back with, most of the time, well, I wasn't sure if I was going to bother you. So we're going to be 3, 4, 5 messages in. There's no questions yet. All right. But if you send me a message that says, hey, this is what I got going on. I've got this car. I want to race it this track with these rules. Do you have some advice for this? Or, hey, the car's not running right and I tried this or this. Do you have any advice for that? Give me as much information as possible to begin with. If you just say, hey, how do I make my car turn? My answer is probably going to be with the steering wheel. Right. But if you ask me a question that's, hey, so when I go into the corner, the car really seems to want to push, but when I get in the gas, like the push goes away, or, the car turns really good, but when I get on the gas, it starts to push. Give me some setup information. Like, what kind of tires do you have? Are you racing dirt? Are you racing pavement? Do you have a stock setup? Like, just give me information. The more information you can give me, the better I can answer your question. So I encourage people to message me. I'm happy to have conversations and to answer questions and stuff. It's so much easier to answer those questions if you ask them and if you give me as much information as possible. I have somebody that I'm pretty sure has blocked the page at this point because they messaged me personally asking for advice. We were 7 questions in before they actually asked the question. And the question was, how do I go faster? And I said, drive better. And they got mad at me. So, like, I how do you go faster? You make it turn better or you add more horsepower. I can only help with as much as you give me. So I try to be nice and I try to do that. But if I answer 15 people's questions, and it takes an extra 5 to 10 minutes per person, that's over an hour of just, yes, you can ask a question. Yes, it's okay. You can ask a question. So I'm not trying to be mean in any way. I still encourage you to send me messages, send me questions. I have a few to catch up on now. So if people have sent me some lately, I do still have to respond, but I'm working on it. So yeah. All right. Now to get into it. I don't have the whiteboard, as you can see, but what I have done is I've pulled up some pages so that we can do some explanations on stuff. So I want to start out with saying that there's essentially 2 types of tires that people are going to deal with. We're going to talk tires first, then we're going to talk gear ratios. The 2 main types of tires that we're going to get into are pretty much Hoosiers. So your Hoosier racing tire, your Cobra racing tire, or your American Racer racing tire, but they're tires made for racing by one of the stock car brands. Okay. So like I personally race on the Hoosier 790 or 795. There's a few different sizes of those. They're they are designated with a little bit different sizing. Okay. And we'll talk about it. But the other version that we're going to talk about are DOTs. Okay. And I'm using quotation marks, but DOT tires are basically tires that you can buy to put on a streetcar. They're Department of Transportation rated, hence DOT. There are certain things that go into a DOT rated tire, and especially with like how they're sized and stuff like that, the construction, tread pattern, blah, blah, blah. There are levels to DOT tires. It depends on whether you're going to race on dirt or asphalt. Now, throughout our little spiel here, throughout the little stuff that we're going through, I do want you to keep in mind that I don't race dirt. So if you want a dirt tire recommendation, I'm going to tell you most people seem to use the BF Goodrich radial TAs or like the Mastercrafts or the Douglas Extra Tracks. Okay. I don't have a good dirt tire because I don't race dirt. So I don't really have advice for you. But I will tell you how you can figure out what might work for you. Okay. Let's jump into it. So we'll start out with the size on the tires. And some of you are going to look at me like this isn't new news, but the size of a tire is one of pretty much two different written two different ways, but they say the same thing. So a Hoosier 790 has a 13, a 14, and a 15-inch version. So that's your rim size, a 13-inch rim, a 14-inch rim, and a 15-inch rim. The 14s are the most common for us, and they are available in two sizes. They are a 23/7-14 or a 24/7-14. Okay. That size, the first number is the diameter, the second number is the width, and the third number is the rim size. Okay. So a 23/7-13 or a 26/5-7-15, that's the size that they're telling you that they are. Okay. Now, that's what they're supposed to be. So the diameter, again, if you have a circle, the diameter is from one point to the other. Doesn't matter where, because on a circle, as long as it goes from one end to through the center into the other, that's your diameter. Okay. You can use diameter to get circumference, which is the circle size, right? But that's what the chalk mark is supposed to mean on a racing tire, is roughly how big it's supposed to be around. Because we want stagger, we want different size tires, you're going to have different sizes. So even though it might be a 24, it could be from a 74-inch all the way, 74-inch circumference all the way to like a 78 circumference. So on a racing tire, it is important to measure it if the size actually matters to you that much. Okay. If you're trying to get a certain amount of stagger, or if you have to have a certain size to hit a certain RPM at a certain, track, stuff like that, then it matters that circumference. Okay. Now, some DOT tires can be rated like that, but they're usually like truck tires, right? So like you might get somebody's, well, I got 28s or I got 32s or I got 40s, right? It's generally they are measured in inches, but they're usually truck tires are measured in that manner. But that one still, if you see a big number, that's like an inch size, because obviously like a 235 is a big number, but that's millimeters. Okay. So in an inch size, 28, 32, 40, 60s, right? Diameter, second number is going to be width. So like you get like a 33, 10, 5, 15. Pretty common truck tire size. All right. So that's your racing tire size is typically going to be in inches like that. Now, I want to show you guys. I went to Google just to give you guys an example. This is Google. I searched tire size explained. Okay. And down here, I've got a picture popped up here, but once tire rack, tire size explained, tire agent, custom offsets, Les Schwab, like all of these. Okay. They're all about to say the same thing that I am. And I have been accused of being wrong about this more than once. And it kind of amuses me because back in the day, this isn't this isn't what it used to be back in the day. Back in the day, you'd have like a G70 tire. Okay. That went away with bias plies. This is how radials are measured. This has been the standard for like 40 years now. So if you're watching this and you're an old timer and you'd like to argue with me about what I'm about to explain, that's cool. Literally every single like piece of information that I can show you agrees with me. Okay. Because again, I've been accused of it. So we're switching over. This is Bridgestone. Okay. And again, Bridgestone, very large manufacturer tire, determining tire size. And we're going to talk about all the numbers briefly. We're going to talk about the most important ones first. Okay. Which is this picture right here. Okay. It's listing off a P225/70R16, and then after those is a 91S. Okay, so the first thing, the P is only relevant slightly. It stands for passenger. So you could have a passenger tire, you could have a light truck tire, which would be an LT. Okay, those are really, they're not important for what we do. Okay. The next number, that 225, that is important for what we do. Why is that important? Well, that's the width, okay, in millimeters. So that tire is 225 millimeters wide, okay? Pretty self-explanatory if you need to figure out how that compares to standard size. Use your calculator. It's basically 24.1 inches or 25.1 millimeters per inch or so. Okay. A 205 is roughly an 8-inch tire, roughly. Okay. Now, the next number is aspect ratio. It's this 70. And this is the one that has a lot of people tell me how wrong I am. That 70 is the aspect ratio. Okay. When you get into a tire size, a metric tire size like this, the aspect ratio is the height of the sidewall as a ratio of the width. Okay. And this is where a lot of the old timers have argued with me that, no, that's the width of the tire. No. Okay. Aspect ratio is very simple and easy to understand. It's complicated to do the math from time to time, but it's easy to understand. You just take that number, put a dot in front of it, so 0.70, and you multiply by the first number. Okay. And that tells you how tall the sidewall is on one side. Okay. That it's pretty simple. That just how tall the sidewall is going to be is 70% of the first number. Okay. That's how you can have taller or shorter tires that are the same width. So if you have a 225/70 or a 225/50, the width should theoretically be the same, and the sidewall is going to be taller or shorter. The 70 series will be taller than a 50 series. Okay. The taller the sidewall, the more it deflects. So the taller the sidewall, theoretically, the less high performance of a tire it is. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind with that too is that because the second number is a ratio of the first number, if I go from a 225 to a 195, but I keep the same rim and I keep the same aspect ratio, it will be shorter because 70% of 225 is a lot more than 70% of 195. Okay. Now, if you're like, Todd, how do I follow? How does this all? Don't worry. I'm going to show you guys how you can easily calculate all of this in just a second. Okay. So the next number or the next part of that is the R. The R stands for radial, which is typically a steel belted radial. Okay. Again, not that important because most all tires made nowadays are an R. They're all going to be radial. That last number is the rim size. That matters because how big is the rim that goes on the inside? Is it a 13, a 14, a 15, a 16, a 17, right? Now, another thing to keep in mind is that if I have a 225/70 13 and a 225/70 16, the 16 will be a lot bigger because the width And the sidewall aspect ratio stays the same, but I go from 16 or 13 inches of rim to 16 inches of rim. So I added an inch and a half of rim on both sides, both halves. So it's 3 inches taller across the diameter, right? So I can have the same size, but because the rim size changes, the tire size changes. And anytime you change the diameter, the circumference changes. Okay. We'll get into why that matters here in just a second, too. But if you change any of those three numbers, you are changing the height of the tire. Okay. You might not change the width unless you change the first number, theoretically, but you are going to change the height of the tire, which changes the circumference of the tire. Okay. And if you're like, but Todd, how does it change the circumference of the tire? Well, pi r squared, right? I think that's area. Yeah, I think that's area. Is circumference pi r squared or is area pi r squared? One of the two. But to find circumference, it changes if the diameter changes. Okay. That's why. Right. Now, if you're asking how all of that, so the next three, by the way, the 91 is your load index and the S is your speed rating. Okay. And I'll actually pull up tire speed ratings. We'll see if this one works. I don't care about the yeah, okay. All right. So just to show this is on Discount Tire. This is your speed rating. This is the maximum speed rating, okay? And the idea is that the way that they do this test, and I'll see if they actually no. It says that it's max speed, but the speed rating is actually determined by how long it can sustain those speeds. So the higher the speed rating, the faster that tire can sustain. Okay. For us, we care, but we don't, because for the most part, a lot of tires are speed rated well enough for us that they're going to be in the STUV range, which is, S is 112, U is 124, V is 149. A lot of tires are in that S to U range. You would have to sustain speeds above that for I forget the distance. If you do, then it runs the risk of coming apart. And the thing is that the speed rating was determined from heat. At 130 mile an hour, a tire rated for 100 mile an hour, the heat builds up and builds up and builds up until the centripetal force can get it to blow apart. Okay. So while we do get the tires hot, we typically don't exceed their speed ranges. If you have a T rated tire up to 118 and you're only hitting 85 mile an hour at your local track, you're well within that safety margin. So you do want to pay attention to the speed rating, just because you don't want to be putting a tire rated for 62 mile an hour and then go to a track where you're running 85 to 90 mile an hour consistently. Okay. However, it's not a huge it's not a big indicator of a tire's performance. So I tend to not look at speed rating basically ever. Okay. Load rating is another one of those things that we are likely to never exceed the load. So not a big deal to look at the load rating. But the heavier the load rating, the more weight the tire can hold. Okay. Now, how does all of that pertain? The other thing that we're going to talk about after we go through the sizing stuff of this is we're going to talk about the tread wear. That's the next one that's really important. Okay. But the thing that is important as far as size goes is how many RPMs per mile. Okay. How many revolutions per mile, basically. And why that matters is because that determines the miles per hour you run given a certain RPM with a certain gear ratio. Okay, so you can have, if I'm running the same engine, same transmission in second gear, the tire size, the revolutions per mile will dictate how fast I'm going to be able to go, how many miles an hour I'm going to be able to go. Okay. So I found this really neat site for you guys and gals to be able to compare tires and to do some of the calibrations here. So this is new. I have not seen this site before, but this is tiresize.com, and they are claiming they are your ultimate tire resource. And you can shop for tires on here. But what I want to show you guys is the tire size calculator. Okay. And I already have, and see here, you can see there's an ad across the top where you can buy tires. Okay. But if you scroll down just slightly, I have already entered two different sizes in here. Okay. I have a 205 75 15, and I have a 195 60 14. And what this handy little deal does here, and this is, and you can Google this and you can find multiple different ones. You know, you can go ahead and post in the comments what your favorite tire size comparative deal is. Okay. But tire size number one, a 205 75 15, is 27.1 inches tall. It has a circumference of 85.1 inches, right? Which means that it turns 744 revolutions per mile. Okay. It also has a 6.1 inch sidewall, right? Now, if we run a 195 60 14, okay, we have now went to a 23.2 inch tall tire. It has a circumference of 72.9 inches, and it's going 869 revolutions per mile. Okay. So if we look over here at the bottom underneath the two tire sizes, which these two tires are the visual comparison of the actual tire size difference. Okay. But it'll show you that down at the bottom, if your tire size number one is what was on the car, okay, and you switch to tire size number two, if your speedometer says 60 miles an hour, you're going to be only going 51.4. Okay. And where that matters for us is that means you are going to be turning a lot more RPM to hit the same mile an hour. Right. So, and if we scroll down here, you can see there's other size stuff. Tire size calculator charts by diameter. So, like this shows you if you want a 24-inch tire, a 13-inch wheel, a 14-inch wheel, a 15-inch wheel, these tire sizes should get you pretty close. Okay. Now, the other pretty neat thing is that this is a side-by-side comparison. So if I actually come up here on the left-hand side and I just hit tire calculator, it actually shows us just one size. But if we come over here to the right side and we scroll down a little bit, it will actually go through and show us that with a 14-inch wheel, we have a 25.3-inch tall tire. Okay. So it'll actually say this is with a 205 70 14. So it does have two different sizes in here. So it's a different size, but it'll show us that it's 25.3, and it'll show us slightly bigger, slightly smaller. And then as we get farther away from that in inches, it'll actually show us like a 225 60 14 is a 24.6 inch diameter tire, whereas a 215 70 14 is a 25.9 inch tire. So it kind of gives you that variance as far as like how close you can be. Okay. Now, if you already know what RPM you want to run at your racetrack and you already know your gear ratios, it's pretty easy to figure out from there tire size, because you're just going to need to work backwards. And again, you can Google different calculators that are all going to be able to tell you which way you need to go as far as tire size and all that kind of stuff. Okay. What's up, Delaney? You know what? I did that and I didn't show you at all. I never changed it. Oh, I feel goofy. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm going to just briefly show you back this. So this is the single tire, okay? This is a single tire where it just has the one and it shows you the chart, okay? And if we come over here to tire comparison, this is where on the left-hand side, you can type in the two different sizes, hit compare, and then it shows you size 1, size 2, and the difference, okay? And the right hand side is the actual physical size difference. And then at the bottom is the speedometer error. So I deeply apologize for that. Not a single comment telling me that I screwed that up. So thanks. Appreciate that. Wouldn't have seen it because I was scrolling around the other side there, right? Whoo. Yeah. So tire size is one of those that is really easy to kind of figure this stuff out. Okay. Because your rules are gonna limit what your kind of what you're allowed to run. Um so I don't have to worry about knowing what I don't have to worry about being able to figure out a good Hoosier tire to run if the rules don't allow me, right? So that's the kind of thing that I don't really have to I don't have to worry too much about getting outside of um where I'm going to be. Now, if I'm running dirt, okay, on asphalt, you kind of have to worry about tread wear pattern and DOT the tread wear pattern and the tread wear rating, okay? Because dirt is honestly the same way, but for slightly different reasons, okay? Yeah, and as Delaney says too, the one thing to keep in mind too with sizes is that different manufacturers can have different sizes because just because it says that it's a 205 75 15, it doesn't mean that it's 25 inches tall. Okay. So you are going to want to measure them once you get them just to make sure if that tire size is important to you. Okay. Now, um, tread wear, like tread block or tread wear pattern. I'll actually pull up. We'll pull up a Toyo R888R. Okay. And we'll pull up images. All right. I don't really have a great one that's like straight on. Um, but, oh, here we go. Okay. Open this image in a new tab. Make sure this is what I want. Yep. Okay. So we're going to use my hands but we're going to talk. I'm going to show you. So this is a Toyo 880 T880R or 888R. Okay. What I want to show you guys and gals with this one is just how big the tread is not. And what I mean by that is there are huge chunks of rubber that's all connected. Okay. This is where I wish I had the whiteboard. But if you look on the right hand side, almost all the way around the tire, there's just very small grooves. Then there's a small tread pattern. It comes over. There's one big groove out of the middle. It slides back over, and then there's just little diamonds kind of out of each side. This is a really good tire on asphalt. Okay. The reason being, the more tread that the more rubber you actually physically put on the road, the better your chances are for grip. Okay. Asphalt, concrete, it isn't smooth as glass. It has small little, I'm just going to remove this down just a little bit so you can see my hands a little bit. It's not smooth as glass. It actually has little bumps and abrasions. It's like sandpaper. Okay. The rubber, when it gets hot and it gets warm, it actually flows into those dips and, conforms around all the spikes. So the more rubber that you actually physically have touching the ground, the more that rubber can fill those nooks and crannies and provide traction. Okay. As long as the surface is clean. Obviously, if it's covered in sand and dirt and grit, it'll just slide, or rain if it's wet. Okay. That's why rain tires for like F1 and NASCAR and IndyCar and all that, they're not slicks. They have patterns and they have tread blocks and stuff on them. One is water evacuation, so it actually takes water away so the rubber can hopefully get down. But by having smaller tread blocks across the same size, you are actually putting a higher pressure on each individual block. So it's the same as saying whether you stand on a flat board or whether you're standing on like 10 nails, right? The tips of them. And it's you have the same amount of force applied to the top, but you have more force applied in small, tiny areas versus across the whole thing. Your PSI is different. Pounds per square inch is completely different. Okay. If you have tread blocks that have a lot of space and gap in between them, you can like ram that tread block down harder with the same amount of weight applied to the tire. Now, on dirt, that can be very advantageous because you can actually get down past the mud and the muck, grab something sturdy, and go on. You're trying to bite harder. On asphalt, what happens is that you're typically going to overload those tread blocks, and you can either rip them off or they just get greasy because that's what rubber does when it's overheated. Okay. By having large, chunky tread blocks as well on asphalt, and this can happen on dirt too. The more rubbered up a track is on dirt, the more this effect can happen. But if you have a big giant tread block sticking up, so you have this from here up is your tread block. If it bites and it's trying to pull it sideways, you can actually roll that tread block over and it'll grab this part and it'll rip it and you'll chunk the crap out of the tires. That's where having less tread blocks, more rubber to the ground, it won't allow it to do that, right? Now, the other way you can avoid that is shaving your tires. I know it sounds goofy because you're like, do I get the like Bic out? Like, is it a Gillette razor kind of thing? Nope, it's just a process. And the idea is that you take that tread block and you just cut it in half. And you don't have the leverage to roll that entire tread block over. And so it just wiggles a little bit. You can't grab it down here and chunk it. You're only grabbing it up at the top and it just kind of skims across. So shaving tires often, it could be a slight performance advantage because your tires aren't as wiggly, but it honestly is used significantly more for making the tires last a lot longer because you're not going to grab that tread block and chunk it completely out of there. Okay. So if you are looking for a tire to try out to run, a tire like this, the Toyo, and this is the R888R. Okay. It doesn't have as much of a tread block to wiggle and squiggle and squirm and break away. Now, for example, we're going to use the beloved dirt tire. So I am going to pull up one of the BF Goodrich Radial TA. Ooh, these are actually on the Amazons. Okay. So we're going to, okay, that's a bad picture. It's not very big. Just a second. Let me try harder to find one that I can actually pull up here. Oh, yeah, here we go. This should work. Yep. Okay. So this is the BF Goodrich Radial TA. A couple things you'll notice is that there is a ton more tread pattern. So there's a lot more grooves. There's a lot more small little grooves, stuff like that. There's a lot more tread going on in this tire. Now on dirt, the fact that it has the grooves around the circumference can really help because that can help direct the tire. The tread blocks are small enough, they don't squirm around a whole lot to be able to help provide traction and bite and go forward. Okay. However, on pavement, all those little individual blocks, all of them are going to, sorry, I think I hit the wrong one. I think that buzzed, but it was a pretty loud burp. All of those tread blocks are going to squirm, wiggle, lay over, and have the propensity to chunk and come out. Now, if you and I are racing on the same tire, you know, it doesn't matter about that squirm and that chunk and stuff like that because we're on the same tire. But if I have that Toyo that I just showed you and you have this, even if the compounds and all the tread wear and all that was the same, based on tread pattern alone, I should be faster than you just because that tire is going to put a lot more rubber on the ground. So that's why there is a difference in these DOT tires that have to do with the tread pattern. Okay. And if you're going to be like, Todd, what is a really good asphalt tire? That 888R is a good tire. The Falcon's a good tire. The Azenia, a lot of those are. But where we start getting into issues is what your rules state as far as tread wear ratings. Okay. The Toyo, I'm going to double check. That Toyo should be close to a 200 tread wear pattern. Okay. I can go back and actually back one more time. Oh, one more time. Okay. Actually, I'm guessing Walmart will say it. Treadwear. Now, the other thing to remember with treadwear is that it is self-reported by the manufacturer. Okay. So that is one thing to keep in mind. Okay. And I say that because some manufacturers are trying to, they're trying to help some things out. Okay. Okay. So this is actually not, this has a treadwear rating of 100. So that Toyo that I showed you, the 888, this one has a treadwear of 100. Okay. A lot of racetracks have a 200 treadwear or higher rule. Now, why 200 is important is that there are some pretty decent performance tires out there that are designed for autocross. Tire manufacturers, they want to be the winning tire as far as things like autocross and road racing and that are concerned, especially showroom classes that might use a street tire. Okay. It's like this Toyo, being at 100 tread wear doesn't really fit into this category, but for quite a long time, the SCCA had a 140 tread wear rule. And the idea was that you could not have a tire with a lower rating than 140. So a lot of tire manufacturers were in that 140 to 200 range with their tires. They were self-reporting them in that range. It's like the Falcon Azenia is a 200 tread wear tire. Okay. By doing that, these manufacturers start reporting that they're in that range so that they could be used specifically for autocrossing. They're not necessarily great street tires because they're going to wear out pretty fast because the softer tire is, the easier it wears out, right? But when it gets to racing and going fast, that lower tread wear means lower lap times, okay? So if your track has a tread wear rule, you want to try to get as low as possible without finding, there might be some tires that are higher than that tread wear rule that are really good. And that's because of that self-reporting thing. Okay. A manufacturer is the one saying that they are a certain rating. So if your track has a 300 tread wear rule, well, you can't run a tire like this Toyo. You can't run a Falcon Azenia. There's a lot of the trick tires that you can't run. And that becomes important because in the world of what I call DOT, when you hear me refer to as DOT tires, I don't consider the Falcon Azenia or like the Toyo or, any of those. I don't necessarily consider those DOT tires. They are, but in my head, a DOT tire is like a 300 or 400 tread wear tire that's designed to try to, to be an actual street car tire, not an autocross tire. Okay. And we used to have a rule way back in the day when we ran DOT tires. We had a 195 max width, 70 was the shortest sidewall. So we could run a 75 or an 80, but not a 65 or 60. So a 195, 70 with a 300 tread wear rule. and we used to run the Falk or the Sumitomo HCR 200s. They were, I want to say, a 380 or a 400 or a 420 tread wear, which sounds really high when 300 is the low point. But the thing is that that tire was in a category that a lower tread wear rating probably would decrease sales because it's just a cheaper economy passenger tire. So a little bit higher tread wear rating is supposed to mean it'll last a little longer. So people are more apt to buy it if it's a 400 rating than a 300. But for us, tread pattern was really good. Shaved, they lasted a really long time, and they had a ton of grip for what they were. Um, so we didn't care that they were slightly higher than the treadwear minimum. And anytime somebody tried to get real close to that minimum, the tire just wasn't as good. Okay. And as Delaney says, the Ohatsu FP7000, I've heard that was the go-to for a lot of people too. There are no performance tires available that are a 70 series with a 3 or 400 or higher treadwear rating. Okay. They don't make them. You cannot buy a Falcon Azenia R615K in that size. Okay. That's not what they're designed for. So if a track wants to have a good DOT rule where you're not allowing the exotic tires in, having a sidewear rule of 65 or 70 and having a treadwear rule is a really good, easy way to do that. Because again, there are no performance 400 treadwear tires. Okay. Now, part of that is going to be experimenting to find what works for you. But part of that is going to a racetrack. And if everybody there is on the same tire, chances are that's probably the best tire. Don't be afraid to experiment if you're not afraid to be at a disadvantage, possibly for however long you're going to use those tires. Okay. Because if you could find a better tire than everybody else has, you have a leg up on everybody else. But if you find a tire that's a lot worse, you're going to be out to lunch for a week. Okay. Gene says, what about the Hoosier Radial Wet? It's DOT rated. What do you think that would work on dirt? It's possible. The thing with Hoosier wet tires is that they typically are a very soft compound and they do not like heat because they are designed to be cooled by the rain. By the rain. And so if you put on a wet tire like that, like a Hoosier or other, aftermarket tire, the issue is that if you're not running in like wet dirt all night, you have the potential to overheat that tire and chunk it out, blow it out, grease it off like crazy quickly. There's a reason why like F1 and all that, they try really hard to get the wet tires off as quick as possible. But like autocross and road racing and stuff like that, they do too. But it's because they're more likely to chunk those tires because they are soft. They're likely not going to last very long. Okay. So it's possibly worth experimenting, but you are likely going to have somebody at your racetrack complain very quickly if everybody else is supposed to be running like a BF Goodrich and you show up with anything with Hoosier on the side of it as well. So, yeah. And Jason says he's got to find something to replace the 7000s. Also, love them on the dirt car. Yeah. And this is why I started with that disclaimer. If you guys ask me what a good dirt tire is, I'm going to tell you a lot of people run the BF Goodrich Radial TA, or they run the Mastercraft Cobras, or they run the Dunlops or Douglas Extra Tracks from Walmart. Okay. I just don't know what a good dirt tire is. I honestly don't even really know what a good DOT tire on pavement is. I haven't had to run a DOT tire on pavement for a long time. The last 2 or 3 times I did, I literally just borrowed some from people because I didn't care if I had the fastest car. I just needed tires that fit the rules. That was 100% why I ran the tires that I did. No other reason. I just needed tires that were legal, and they were the ones that I got. So I don't know what a good tire is. I can just, as I'm trying to do tonight, this is how you're going to try to tell with tread blocks and DOT The tread wear numbers, a DOT number, like those. That's all I can offer you is just some advice that way. So yeah. Anybody else have any questions on tires? We're going to talk about gear ratios next. So if you have some tire questions, go ahead and throw them out there. If there's something I didn't cover, Delaney mention the buffed tires. So buffing tires for the most part, tires when they're made out of rubber or some version of rubber. The longer that tire exists, the harder it's going to get. The issue is that there is a time frame called curing, which has to happen so that rubber and all the chemicals can off gas as much as possible. If you're curious what happens to a tire if it's ran during that cure time, you simply have to look at Bristol with the late models when we went to 2020, when Hoosier, the pandemic hit, so they get a pass for the first little bit because they weren't allowed and blah, blah, blah. But those tires had no cure time on them. They cannot handle heat. They come apart. Things go poorly. Okay. And that happens to every manufacturer who has ever made tires if that cure time is not met. Once that cure time happens, your tires start to get harder and harder and harder and harder. It starts from the outside and goes in, okay, because the outside's exposed to the atmosphere, right? Kind of like the way a microwave cooks. Outside will be scalding hot, inside's frozen. Same idea, right? It's got to work its way in there, okay? By buffing, what you're doing is you're just taking that top hardened layer off and getting down some new, fresh, exposed rubber. I will be dead honest with you guys and gals. My tire program, I do not buff tires. I don't clean tires. I don't use a tire disc. I don't condition the tires. I am really not good about my tire routine. What I typically do is halfway pay attention to how old the tires are and then put the proper air pressure in them that I want to, and then go from there. I usually don't even take my tires off in between events if I'm not going to. I'm just not that good at taking care of my tires as I'm supposed to. And I'm not BSing you guys at all. And I'm just honest with it. I just really am not that good at it. I need to. I want to start getting better and having a tire program, but I got to get some cars done before I worry about what the tires are doing. So, yeah. Yeah. All right. We got no questions. So let's jump over to gear ratios. Now, this is the next one I find. I will tell you guys and gals, if you are going to message me with a question, Brent says on a Hoosier 795, do you feel a heat cycle is preferred? Okay. All right. So Jason says, in my experience, Brent will answer that in 1 second. Jason says, in my experience, a durometer is a must. I buff tires weekly. Matter of fact, I just came in from tire work. Firm believer in bringing fresh rubber up. See, on dirt, I can 100%. On pavement, for me, I buff my tires in the first 2 or 3 laps on warm up, on practice, stuff like that. So that's part of why I don't do it. Tire buffing is a lot bigger thing on dirt, I think. I could be wrong. There could be a lot of pavement guys doing it that I don't know about, but I see it a lot more with dirt. Dirt guys buffing and tire prep is a much, much, much bigger issue. On pavement, it's usually about new tires, the newer the tire, the better typically. Okay. Now, as far as Brent saying on the 795, do I feel heat cycle is preferred? I don't know. They say that they want that and to prevent issues, but I'll be honest with you. In my experience with the 795, I've typically ran them at Bristol. VCTS runs the 795. They're the only ones that mandate it. And, since everyone in VCTS is on the 795, I think it's a good program. If you're allowed 795 and any other tire, stay away from the 795. They're just a hard tire. They were designed for Bristol. That was the entire intended usage was Bristol Motor Speedway. They are slow. They're a harder compound, harder sidewalls, more plies. They're good for high speed tracks at lasting compared to the 790. They're a lot slower. Now, my personal experience, I have taken 795s that I've heat cycled. So I've ran them in practice, like the day before at Bristol, before features and stuff like that. thing that I've done a lot though is I usually put like a brand new one on the right front for the feature. And I personally have never had an issue with like at Bristol or any other big tracks I've been to with them. I haven't had an issue where the tires have felt dramatically different after a heat cycle or not. Hoosier recommends them. It's usually a good idea to do because with that first heat cycle can help off gas as well. So if there's any gases or anything that's trapped in there, it can help get that out. So a heat cycle, and for those of you asking, a heat cycle is where you would like take a tire out, bring it up to temperature without going over temperature, coming in and then letting it cool completely. So I'm not talking necessarily between practice sessions. If there's long enough between sessions, I am, but otherwise, I'm talking like take tire off and don't use it again for the next day or the next week, just because it needs that time to cool down. Okay. So yeah, I personally have never really found a big difference. So yeah, 795 or a DOT 300 is our current rule set for this year. Interesting. Um, I might actually go with the 795 in that case. Um, to be honest, it'd be a really interesting tire shootout, a 300 tread wear compared to um, a 795. So yeah, yeah, and yeah, the 795s are what the 790s used to be. They do repeat pretty well for a while, two, three, four, five races. They repeat pretty well. The 790s used to, and then Hoosier assured me that there is no correlation between the timeline of Continental buying it and then very shortly afterwards everything going to shit. Um, but Continental bought Hoosier, and then very shortly everything went to shit. And the 790s was one of the tires that they left alone for a long time. I personally ran on 790 since 2009. We got our first set of 790s in 2009. So yeah, just something to keep track of, you know. So sorry, that was part of a thought on that. But yeah, I ran 790 since 2009, and it wasn't until Continental bought them. I mean, I literally won World Series on a 5 night old right front, because it still had the speed, and it still had the speed after 40 laps. Now, uh, 3 nights on a right front is pushing it. Is really pushing it. Just because the tire quality is just not the same. They can argue as much as they want, but having lived it, our tires got left alone. The 790s got left alone, and then suddenly they didn't. So yeah. And Rich says, I normally count heat cycles no matter what. I try to replace a 7 to 10 cycles. Tire management key. See, and that completely depends on the tire, Richard, because that is the thing. Is it the more that you have, the more heat cycles you have, the harder the tire becomes. However, it depends on the rubber because the harder the tire starts out, the heat cycles don't matter as much. And that again goes to if your tire's at 150 degrees or 240 degrees, that also matters. Like getting it just kind of warm, getting it hot, or getting it hot also matters. So I don't disagree with you at all. But that's definitely one where tire temperatures, and that's going to depend on the tire and the racer too. As far as because I've had guys tell me back in the day they couldn't get 2 nights out of a right front on a 790, and one of those guys was telling me how junk they were. At the World Series, I had 5 nights on the right front. So, it's always been that way. The harder you abuse a tire, the less it's going to live no matter what. So, yeah. What size DOT would be equal to a 24 795? Well, hold on. Let's do this math. Okay. So we're going to add this back to the stage. We're going to come over here to our tire size comparator. Okay. Share this tab instead. All right. So we basically want to find a tire with a 24-inch diameter. So let's just try here. Let's just try a 14. So um it changed, right? Yeah, 26. So a 26-inch diameter is a 205 70 14. Um, so a 205 65 14 is 24 and a half. So let's just do a 205 60. Yeah, it's 23.7. So like a 205 60. So let's come over here and put in a 205 60. And this shows us that 185 70 14. So that's the thing. It's not nearly as big as you think, Dad, because our 195 70 14s were basically the same size. Um, yeah, I mean, you're at, a 195 70 14 is 24.7, which would be 77.7 circumference. So a 185 70 is the same essentially as a 24 Hoosier. So, yeah. So the tires we used to run on were taller. So, width is what I was wondering mainly. Yeah, that one you'd have to play around with a little bit, but even that is still, I mean, if we come over here, the width is equivalent to essentially a 7.7-inch tire. So theoretically, a 195 70 14 would be a little bit taller and wider than a 24/7 um, Hoosier, theoretically. So, yeah. Yeah, but that's the kind of stuff you can do if you know what tire you want to deal with. So, yeah. All right. So next thing we're going to talk about is gear ratios. Okay, gear ratios matter because that's what actually turns your tire, right? You've got your engine and your tire. You've got them connected with your transmission. All right. Depending on the make and model you have, there are multiple transmission options. Okay. I'm going to clear out some of these tire tabs so I don't click on the wrong thing. Okay. But I just want to show you guys real quick. All right. We're going to add this back to stage. That way I don't screw this up. This is the Dodge Neon Transaxle Cross Reference Guide, which, by the way, guys and gals, neons.org/forum dodge/trans.htm is where you can go to find this. Okay. Cool part about this one is that it has the gear ratios of all the different options. And then down here, it has the part numbers for all those different options. Okay. Now, these are ones too. These are a cable or hydraulic clutch, and then they're either 135 or 165 foot-pounds, right? Now, one neat thing that they actually do is that you can come down here in the bottom left corner, and if you click on it, this is for the SRT4 transmission. So this is actually the T850. Then you can come over here to the PT Cruiser, and this actually has the T350 HDs and the Getrag transmissions that they had available. And then this little guy over here is the Stratus/Breeze transaxle 2, which was effectively just a 394. Nothing special past that. Okay. But this chart, okay, and I want to show you too. This is one that I found searching very, very quickly. This is for the K series transmission. I found this off Honda or Honda, whatever the Honda Tech one is. Okay. So this is the chart for the K series Hondas. Okay. You can find these typically for your make and model if you search hard enough. Okay. They might be posted. I did a quick one for the Cavaliers. This is what I found, just J body one right here. But the Getrag F23 was basically what was in there. So if you scroll down the Wikipedia, insert a little bit here. Here's your final drive: 394, 417, 441, 384. You might have to look a little bit. You might just have to Google your part number for your transmission. But like this shows you that this F23 was in all these Cobalts and G5s and Ions and the Opals and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So these charts are out there. They are available. Okay. We are going to use the Neon one from here forward because I know most of these numbers off the top of my head, so I can show you the math pretty easily. Okay. Now, we have effectively two choices as far as transmission goes. Okay. We have a 355 or a 394 final drive. We get two more after that just simply because we have different second gears. Okay. Now, why that matters is because that is how you figure out what ratio you actually have. Okay. Now, I have talked to some people who have come at me with their effective gear ratio charts, or they'll post about how they have this gear ratio and it's weird. And I will tell you guys and gals that effective gear ratio is a thing, but it is essentially to compare to a different gear ratio. Okay. If you send me a message about a Neon transmission and or gear ratio, and you send me something and it's got a weird gear ratio, I'm going to ask you what the hell you're talking about, because I've had this multiple times. Well, I'm looking for this transmission and it is a gear ratio that isn't available. I'm like, how the hell did you get that? Well, it's with this tire. No, what tranny are you looking for? Well, it's that, like, it confuses the hell out of me. Okay. So just keep that in mind, that if you come at me with a weird effective gear ratio, I'm probably going to look at you goofy. Okay. Just keep that in mind, right? Now, it's really simple to figure out what your gear ratio is. All you're going to have to do is multiply the ratio of the gear you're running, so first, second, third, fourth, fifth, by the final drive ratio. Okay. That gives you your overall gear ratio. Okay. And a lot of people will talk in, like, I'm running a 355 HD in second. Okay. So that's telling people that I'm running that the 355 in the later gens, the HD version, but I'm running it in second gear. Okay. It's very easy to understand that if you're a Neon guy and you know that those are what you're looking for. The Honda guys do it all the time. Oh, I'm running an F series transmission or a B series tranny or a hydro or whatever nomenclature they have. Same thing with the Cavi guys. Oh, I'm running an ion tranny. Okay. There are specific methods that you can use to describe the transmissions without diving deep into a gear ratio. But if you're trying to do the math on tire size or miles per hour, then you need to know your overall gear ratio. Okay. And it is really, really simple. I'm hoping that this will actually let me show you guys. I got to stop the screen share and I got to switch it. Okay. No, calculator. Okay. I'm going to show you guys a calculator. Now, you got to trust me on this. Okay. Because I just showed it, but we can go back to it. But a Dodge Neon transmission, if I have a 355 ring and pinion, okay, there we go, 3.55 ring and pinion, all right, and I have and I'm going to double check just to make sure I'm not rounding differently. Yeah, 213 and 195. Okay, thought so. Just had to check. Okay. So if I have a 355, but I have a non HD, it is a 213 gear ratio. So it's multiplied by 2.13 gives me a 756. Okay. So if I have a standard 355 out of a first gen car, it has a 756 second gear ratio. Okay. If I'm trying to run that same transmission in third gear, so I have a 3.55 times 1.3. Back her up. 1.36. Come on, keyboard. Okay. I have a 482. And if you guys were wondering why there's so many Neon guys that are like, yeah, like I'm banging the limiter in second, but I shift to third and it comes out of the corner like $4,000. That's why we go from a 756 to a 482 with the transmission most first gens were delivered with. Okay. But this tells me the gear ratio that I have. Okay. And you're going to be like, well, Todd, why is that important? Okay. Why does that matter? Well, if we go to something like, I got to switch how I'm sharing. Yeah, we do have a 195 in the HD, which is why we like to run the HD, because it then goes to a 691 instead of that 756. Okay. But if we go to Bob says there are online calculators for tire height, but the formula is tire width in millimeters times aspect ratio divided by 2540 times 2 plus rim diameter in inches. Bob, I fully believe you, my friend. I myself prefer to just pull things up on the internet because it's much easier for me to do. So I try to share that method with the audience. So I thank you, Bob, for giving us the proper math calculations. Now, what I have here, this is from Tremec. This one, I actually kind of like this gear ratio chart here, because what you can do is you can come up here and you can tell it that you want to run 7,000 RPMs and that you have an axle ratio, which your axle ratio in a front wheel drive is your final drive. So for my case, it would be a 3.55. My tire height in inches, okay? So we're going to use that 24-inch tire. Okay. Right. Now below, if you look, it says enter your tire height here. Use the aspect ratio calculator below if you do not know your tire. You actually can come scroll down a little bit and it gives you the tire width in millimeters, aspect ratio, your wheel diameter. You calculate it, it'll give you your tire height, the tire width. Okay. But scroll up a little bit, we put those three things in. So I know that I want to run 7,000 RPMs at 355 RPMs, or with a 355 HD final ratio. So first gear, let me just double check if it's 354. Okay. So first gear is a 3.54. Second gear is a 2.13. Okay. Third gear is a 1.36. Fourth gear, I want to say, is 103. Okay. 1.03. And I'm not going to worry about fifth gear, because fifth gear, there are different options, but that doesn't matter to us. But I can come up here and I can hit calculate speed. Okay. And that tells me that my max speed, or my mile per hour at 7,000 RPMs with a 24-inch tire is going to be 39.77, 66.1, 103.52, or 136.69. Okay. So if I know that I have this transmission ratios and this rear end ratio, final drive ratio, I can change two things in this equation very easily without changing my transmission. I can say, if I've done the math and say I need to run 75 miles an hour. Okay. What do I got to do to hit 75 mile an hour? Well, 103 is really high. So if I'm going to run this tire, man, I don't know. That's way too high. I'm not gonna have nearly enough RPM. Okay, well, let's say instead of 7,000, I'm gonna run 8,000 RPM. We're gonna calculate it. Bam, 8,000 RPM, 355 with 24-inch tire. I'm gonna turn 75.54 mile an hour at 8,000. I got real lucky on that one. So I can change to the mile an hour I need just by turning the motor a little harder. Okay. But let's say that I don't have that capability. Okay. Let's say I can only turn 7,500 RPM. That's my max. That's the most I can turn. Well, I'm only going to run 70.82. But you know what I can change? I got a stack of tires. So instead of running a 24-inch tire, let's say I run a 24.2-inch tire. Calculate that one. Well, 71. All right. So let's just do a 24.8-inch tire. We'll go a little bit bigger. 73. All right. So that still won't do it. So let's say we run a 25.5-inch tire. That's the next size I got. Hit calculate. Bam. 75. Okay. So I need a 25.5-inch tire if I'm only going to turn 7,500 RPM. I then work backwards through everything else that I'm doing. Okay. To be able to get to the tire size that I need. You can also find out your effective gear ratio after a tire height change by dividing the current tire height by the new tire height, i.e., current tire height equals new tire height. Yes. And that goes to, you can calculate all this stuff, but I'm going to tell you guys my stance on it. And I could be way wrong. You guys can tell me and I'm an idiot. Okay. I personally, effective tire height sound or effective gear ratio sounds so cool. Like, sounds so great. Yep. Swap tires and I have an effective gear ratio of 3.73. Okay. The thing for me and the way that I work this in my head, I have that effective ratio, but it's a lot easier for me with racing to be able to say I have a 355 because it doesn't matter what I do. I am going to have a 355. It doesn't matter if I change the tire size, I have a 355. I know in my head, if I run a much smaller tire, that I have less top end and I have, I go from there. Okay. I know it's going to accelerate harder, but it's not going to go as fast. Okay. Because in my world, in stock car racing, the effective gear ratio doesn't matter because I'm not going to re-gear. I can't re-gear my rear end I can go from a 373 to a 390 or a 390 to a 410 or blah, blah, blah. Okay. I can't do that because I can't make minute changes. So in my head, in my world, effective gear ratio just doesn't matter because if I change the tire size, then I change the tire size. I don't change the gear ratio of it, So I'm not saying you are wrong at all. And Bob 100% is correct in how you get to that point. But if somebody's talking to me about effective gear ratio, it doesn't matter because I'm going to skip back to, well, what's your trans ratio? Okay, well, what's your tire size? Like, I'm going to break it back down. So, yeah. And Jeff says, so what's a lower RPM trans, 394 or 355 non-HD? You will turn less RPM with a 355 than you will a 394 because that goes to the math portion. If we go back to the calculator, okay. And Ryan says most guys are trying to find the right RPM, not speed, though. We will get to that one in just a second. Okay. So I'm going to show you just real quick. We're going to go back to the calculator and just show you how this matters. Okay. Because your gear ratio, the lower the number, the less RPMs you turn for the same speed. Okay. If your tire size stays the same, but you change the gear ratio, the smaller the number, the more speed for the same RPM or less RPM for the same speed. Okay. So in this instance, a 355 in third is 4.82. So if we do the exact same where we have 1.36, oh, darn it, 36 times 3.94, we get 5.3854, which we'll call 5.36. Okay. So if we go from, let's just come over here. Okay. The other thing too is I guess I could have done it this way. Okay. Present, share screen. We'll go back to the Tremec, the gear ratio one here. Okay. So if we have same tire size, so right now in second gear with this transmission, we're going to be running 75.25 with a 355. If we swap that to a 3.94 tranny, we're going to be running 67.8 mile an hour. Okay. So yeah, just the higher the number, the more RPM for the same speed. So Gene says on a typical short track, you'll run about 20% above peak horsepower RPM. If peak horsepower happens at 6,000 and you're geared right, you'll turn 7,200. So I won't necessarily disagree with you, Gene, but I will just offer a little different point of view that all really does depend on the horsepower ability and how quickly it drops off. And the reason I say that is that I've known people who peak horsepower is at like 7,000 and at 7,500 RPM, they're making like 80 less horsepower. Like they physically don't want to turn it. If peak power is a 7, they don't want to turn it to 8 because it makes no power past 75. They'll lose speed, so they'll gear it or tire size it so that they're trying to hit just past peak. So in a perfect world, Gene is basically right. You'll come out of the corner at peak torque and you'll go just past peak horsepower to go into the corner. That way you're pulling the entire straightaway. But that really does depend on the track size, the engine, and stuff like that. So Gene is not wrong. It's just that if you're sitting here like, it feels like it just runs all out of steam, it just could be that your dyno graph goes. So just one thing to keep in mind. So, and Brent says, when doing math on tire size versus gear ratio, and you run a 24-inch right front and a 23-inch left front, if on an open diff, what tire size do you plug in? So, funny enough, Brent, I have asked that question to people who are much smarter than me, and I never have gotten a straight answer. Essentially, I've never gotten the same answer by both. I would think that you would kind of divide the two. And I say that because if the differential spinning, if the differential is spinning at one speed, okay, in my head, it makes a lot of sense that as you're going down the straightaway, if this tire, we're going to use round numbers, if this tire goes down the straightaway at 200 revolutions and this tire goes down at 150 revolutions, they're going to equal themselves out in that variance, and you're going to turn 175 at the diff. Now, I have asked that question to people who are smarter than me, how to account for tire size at stagger. And most people just tell me that they pick one or the other, and they just kind of go from there. Because unless you can compare GPS speed data, or if you have a way to measure speed independent of all of that, and you can compare that to the mathematical speed that you're running based on tire size and everything, you don't really have a way to compare the two, at least that I have not experienced. If anybody watching this now or later has an answer to that question, or can explain the reasoning why they have an answer or the reasoning behind their thought, I would be happy to hear it. That's my opinion, is that you split the two. But that's my opinion. So I've not necessarily found a good answer. So yeah. So if you're running a 23.2 tire and you switch to a 24.2 tire, you're overcoming your overdrive your current gear ratio by 96. That changes a 5.0 gear to an effective gear ratio of 480. Simple. Yeah. And Bob, I'm not disagreeing with you at all. The whole thing for me though is that if that's just figuring that you have one tire size as your base standard tire size always, right? So like if I was racing dirt and I had 15 different tire sizes, that means I'm going to compare everything against that one tire always. That way I can say, well, my effective ratio is, a 5.0 or a 480. Well, I have to use that 5.0 tire because then I might have a 520 or 540 or 550. So in my head, it doesn't make sense to me to try to have that comparison tire when I could just say I'm running a 24 tire, or a 23 tire on my 355. So you're not wrong. I 100% agree with you. The way I do it in my head, to me, it doesn't make as much sense to have effective gear ratio when I can just have gear ratio tire size. So yeah. And Bob says, I have an Excel spreadsheet for that. See, that's why Bob's a lot more prepared than I am. I drive from the seat of my pants. I set up from the seat of my pants. The other thing that helps, guys and gals, I don't race dirt, so I don't have 45, 50 different tire sizes for dirt. I only use one tire size for the most part for pavement. I run a 24-inch Hoosier. I run a 24-inch 790. My car has almost never turned on 23s, so I can't really put the shorter tire on. What I do is I spin it or I don't. So I will vary the RPM just because that's the best I can do. My car handles better and thus is faster, even with not having the proper RPM. Okay. So that's why in my world, I don't do all that much math because I essentially run one of two transmissions. Technically, I will run one of three. I run my limited slip 355 or I run my welded 355. They both have the same ratios. Or I run a 394, which has limited slip. And they all have the same first, second, third gear ratios. So I'm really only changing the final drive. I don't change tire size. When I do, it might be for stagger on the left front, but basically that's it. Okay. Now, as far as being able to find the RPM, okay, that one is going to go based on you can do the exact same. So let me actually look up what I am. Okay, because there are some charts, and again, this is you can kind of do actually, I bet you can do the math backwards. So let's actually try it. Um, I'll be curious. I'm gonna change something here. A lot of these charts that we're going to show you. So I tell you what, let's find out together. I don't even care if I'm right or wrong. I don't care on this one. Okay. Um, so this is that same Tremec gear ratio chart, and we're trying something. And basically, what we're doing is I am going to put 75 miles an hour in this category here, and I'm going to leave engine RPM blank, and we will see. Nope. So I have to put RPM. Okay. So a lot of these you can do them differently. So, okay. So according to this one, we're going to try this one out. This is advanced electric vehicles. This is just one I found on Google. It allows you to enter 3 or 4 variables and it'll calculate the other one. Okay. So differential ratio of 345 tire day, which differential ratio. Okay. What you're going to do is you type in your overall ratio that you figured out. So for us, we're going to use, hold on, my cursor moved. We're going to use that 4.82. Okay. And let's say I'm running 70 miles an hour and I don't know what RPM I have. Okay. So let's say that we've got 24-inch tire. We can compute RPM at 70 mile an hour in third gear. We're only going to be at 4,700 RPM. Okay. Let's say that we switch to the 7.56. Let's compute the RPM. Now we're 7,400. Okay. Mind you, same speed, same tire size. We went from 4,000 to 7,000. Okay. So that is one calculator that you can get to do that. You are going to have to know one of a couple things to be able to figure out tire size or gear ratio for tracks. Okay. You are either going to need to know the mile an hour that people are running, right? Or you're going to need to know tire size, RPM, and gear ratios that people are running. Okay. Most every track out there, right? Somebody's going to be able to say, I have a Neon. So I'm going to be able to say I ran a 355 HD in second gear on 24-inch Hoosiers, and I was turning about 7,800 RPM. Okay. You can ask around. Most people will give you some of that information. You might be able to get different information from different people. Tire size is one you can usually figure out on your own because you can just look, right? But as a rule of thumb, people are probably going to give you the basic information. All right. So if you are trying to figure out RPM based off mile an hour, If everybody's like, oh yeah, we're hitting 100 mph, okay, you're just going to be looking up something like this, and you're going to type it in, and you're going to go, okay, 100 mph. Because mile an hour, the nice part about mile an hour is that it doesn't necessarily care about your gear ratio. Um, because if you're hitting your RPM where you need to be, you can do it in second or third or fourth or fifth. The ratio doesn't matter as much. If everybody's roughly hitting 100 mph, you can try to gear for 100 mph for you. Now, if everybody's doing that at 300 wheel horsepower and you have 100 wheel horsepower, obviously you're not going to hit 100. Okay. But if everybody's at 200 and you have 190 or 185 or 215, you're probably going to hit close to 100. So if we come over here to this calculator and I say, okay, I don't know what RPM I'm going to hit, but I do know that I'm going to run a 756 gear. I'm going to start with a 24-inch tire. Oh shit, I can't spin 10,584 RPMs. Okay, well, let's say I only can spin 8,200. What tire size do I need? Oh, a 31-inch tire. Oh shit, I don't have a 31-inch tire. Okay, so I have a 25-inch tire. Let's see. Oh, I need a 6:10 gear ratio. Oh, I have a 6:0 gear ratio. If I have, for me, I wouldn't. For me, I'd go 582. That'd be as close as I could get. Um, but that's the thing, is that you can then say, okay, well, to turn 8,200, I need this gear ratio with this tire to turn that mile an hour. So you're going to have a few different variable settings. Okay. You're going to have a few different variables. You're going to have to know what you're running. Okay. And the thing is that you can calculate mile an hour, because it's the same kind of deal. Like if you go to this exact same calculator, and no joke, I was turning 9,100 RPMs with a 23-inch tire, with a 6.91 ratio at the Freedom Factory. So I was turning 90 miles an hour at the Freedom Factory. Now, fun fact, ran the exact same gear ratio, but I swapped tire sizes and the RPM changed. And I was turning 8,700 with a 24-inch tire. So let's find out. I was running roughly the same speed, 89.9 mile an hour instead of 90.1 mile an hour. So that's the beauty of mile an hour. Doesn't care about gear ratio. Okay. So yeah, 90 mile an hour to run the B main at Freedom Factory. I had a lot of motor down there though. So okay, so Bob says tire sizes that I have ran. And he says he's ran a 185 60 14, a 195 60 14, a 195 65 15, 195 65 14, a 185 70 14, 195 70 14, 205 70 14, a 215 60 15, a 205 55 16, and dirt over asphalt. Hey, you say that, but a whole lot faster on asphalt at Bristol. I'm just saying. There are mile an hour apps use GPS to get your speed. Zip tied my phone to my car. Pretty sweet. Yeah, you can do it through a GoPro. You can do it through a GPS app. And you can do it. I hate to be that guy. If you know what you're doing, you could always put some sort of read the ABS sensor on a rear tire kind of thing. I mean, there's ways to do it. There are ways to reach your mile an hour. You could have a radar gun. You could have somebody stand at the end of the straightaway timing people with a radar gun to get roughly the mile an hour. So yeah, I don't. People ask me about mile an hour all the time, and I'm like, I was turning this at this. Now, when I went to the Freedom Factory, that's as hard as I've ever turned my stuff in second gear. I've gone faster when I run third gear, but most of the time around here, I'll turn upwards of 84 to 8,500 RPM. I'm down there running 87. So like at Springport Motor Speedway. So I'll put it in here. So at Springport Motor Speedway, I turn 8,400 RPM with a 24-inch tire with a 690 gear. I'm running 86.8 mile an hour at the end of the straightaway at Springport. So according, to this. Now, one other thing to keep in mind when you're doing this, tire size is going to vary a little bit because your tires squish, because you're assuming that perfect circle. And when you set the car on the ground, that the bottom of your tire sits like that. So it's not a circle, it sits like that. Okay. So you're not in a perfect world as far as mile an hour go from there. Now the thing is though, is comparison. You know, if I'm running Kalamazoo and I'm turning 8,100 RPM, and I'm running Springport and I'm running, um, you know, 8,500 RPM, 8,400 RPM, well, it's just comparing the two slightly, right? Whereas if I'm trying to go somewhere new and I want to compare them slightly, you know, on dirt, that would be hard running 205 on right rear and a 190 or 165 on the left rear. Ryan, I'm saying off one, like if you just take your right rear and you just read that ABS sensor and you figure out how many revolutions you're getting per mile off from that, right? Then you just have to do the math and figure out, okay, well, that tire's spinning a max of this RPM, and combine that RPM times revolutions per mile of the tire, it gives me this mile per hour. So I'm not saying it'd be easy to do, and I don't think you could do it with a factory-based PCM, but so yeah. Yeah. And it's honestly one too where if you have the mile an hour of your motor or the RPM of your motor, the gear ratio that you have, um, assuming a manual transmission, because with an automatic you do have slippage. But if you have your RPM, you have your gear ratio, and you do have your tire size, especially if you get as accurate as doing the actual circumference of it versus, take a tape measure, measure your stagger, your rollout, whatever you want to call it. If you do all of that, you can just do the math and say, okay, I'm running X RPM. And the way I usually do that is if you're running a huge amount of stagger, or even a little bit of stagger, just measure both tires. And then you can just say, okay, I'm between 85 and 90, because big tires 90, little tires 85, So yeah. Yeah. So any questions on gear ratios or tire sizes? That I can help with. It still smells like paint in here. All right, guys and gals, I do also have a question for you. Bob brought this up last time, and I've been thinking about it. What do you guys think of the panel background? I like it, but I think it's a little too dark. I'll be honest with you. So I'm debating about putting some of my orange and black squares back up, trying to figure out a good way to do it. Or I do have this wall over here is much lighter paneling, so we might rotate stuff. I even thought about going into the corner where it has both. So yeah, I wouldn't mind your opinion on what you think of the background. So yeah. Yeah. But yeah, tonight that was the big deal, was that I wanted to talk about tire size and gear ratio, because I have gotten a lot of questions and I see people asking a lot of questions about it because, well, why wouldn't you? Do wheel spacers make a difference as well? No, not as far as Justin, not as far as tires, like not as far as speed or RPM. The only thing that is going to happen is the wheel is going to be farther out, but that plays no difference on how many revolutions it makes per mile. So Josh says, yeah, get in the corner. Says he likes it. Bob says it's kind of 70s. It's definitely kind of 70s. And the ones over here being a little bit lighter, it is for sure. We almost went stone background. I thought about putting a stone paneling up instead of what we got. And Rice says it's just fine if you're wearing brighter shirts. Yeah, I don't disagree. We threw the sweatshirt on tonight because it's just chilly enough. I didn't want to turn the heater on tonight. So yeah. 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 But all right, ladies and gentlemen, hour and a half. That's what we got. I'm going to try to have a guest on Thursday again. We are going to try to grab one of the Bristol winners, or maybe Mr. Paul Biddle, and get him on here. Mr. Freedom Factory winner himself, Mr. Paul Biddle. We are going to try to have a guest on Thursday so that we can continue that. We're definitely having a lot of fun talking to our guests and get back into the swing of that. So we are going to try to make sure we keep that up. So Thursday, we're going to try to have a guest here in the studio again. So Yeah, if you want to message me, go right ahead. I will try to answer you as quickly and as best as possible. But please, if you message me to ask me a question, just ask your question. I am happy to answer for you, and just give me as much information as possible to begin with, so that I don't have to keep sending messages back and forth, back and forth. So yeah, not that I don't mind talking to you. I just would like to be able to answer questions as efficiently as possible. And so Josh says, can't wait to meet you at the Olga 100. Hey, brother, I would like to. We will see if finances allow me to get out there this year. So the goal is try to get the car together and get out there as quick as I can. So hopefully this year, if not next year, not this year, maybe next year, but it's all money. As long as I can afford to do it, we will. Subscriber group tonight. I tell you what, we will do the subscriber group tomorrow. We will 100%. We'll go live tomorrow night in the subscriber group. And chat it up then. So yeah, I got to go in. I've got my stuff that I've got. I had issues with the website and trying to get some of our new products up. And so I want to try to finish that tonight and get it done. Like, the new rivet dome lights and things like that. So yeah, so tomorrow we'll be live in the subscriber group tomorrow. So, oh yeah, dude, we'll hit up Butler. Butler's almost like my go-to dirt track lately. So we'll be down to Butler at some point this year. I don't know. Kalamazoo opens Friday. Berlin opens Saturday. I've got some options. We might go watch some racing this weekend. We might just go be a spectator this weekend, and then we'll try to go take the camera equipment after that. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we'll talk about it Thursday. So anyways, thank you all for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. Hit the like button if you haven't already. It is the only thing I ask of you. Yeah. Love you guys. We'll see you Thursday.